All right, here we are, Thursday evening again. Just before I get started, I guess I thought I'd just touch on the fact that tonight's episode will be the last for a few weeks. I'm going to have a little winter break on a Thursday night. But yeah, I just wanted to really thank everyone that has been tuning in. It's been an absolute delight chatting to all sorts of different people in the M&D community. Last week we had Michelle and John Callist chatting all things Robbie, and I guess the role of parents and the role they played in having their son go through this horrible disease. And it was certainly a very heartwarming conversation, and I definitely thank them a lot for their time. Over the last 12 weeks now, we've had health professionals, we've had some M&D Victoria staff, obviously clients, carers, and it's been a bit of an honour for me to be able to chat to all these incredible people. Tonight, I'm very fortunate to have Gethin Thomas with me from M&D Australia. The one topic we haven't really touched on over the last 3 months is research. As you can see with my little banner behind me, our motto at M&D Victoria is until there's a cure, there's care. And we've really highlighted the services that we do down here in Victoria. But the big picture of research is a huge talking point in the M&D world. And we'd all love to have no job when a cure is found, and there is no such thing as motor neuron disease. And I guess this is what Gethin will talk about a little bit. But I might hand over to Gethin now. He has been at M&D Australia for 12 months to the day, just about. He is the Executive Director of Research there, and he is very, very smart, way smarter than me. So I'm not going to talk any more about research and what he does. So Gethin, thank you. I might get you to touch on M&D Australia and M&D Research Australia in a bit more depth, and we can talk about what you do a little later on. Over to you.
Great. All right, thanks, Dan, and thanks for having me on tonight. It's great to have the opportunity to talk to your audience. So briefly, yes, M&D Australia has been around since 1991. They originally started back in 1981, I think, when there's M&D societies formed in Sydney and Melbourne. Then they came together and amalgamated M&D Australia in 1991. So M&D Australia is kind of an umbrella organisation that works with the national network of state M&D associations, including M&D Victoria. And their roles, as I'm sure most people are aware, is to advocate, educate. It raises awareness, and the real role of M&D Australia, or the goal, is to empower Australians impacted by M&D to live better lives, live their lives as well as they can. The real hands-on care, that's provided by the state associations. M&D Australia doesn't provide the actual care. We work at the national level, as I said, in the advocacy and education and awareness space. MDRA, we just changed our name about a month ago from the M&D Research Institute of Australia to M&D Research Australia, which probably we feel better represents our role as a national research body and also our alignment with M&D Australia. MDRA was actually founded in 1984, and it has a vision to understand the causes, improve the care, and find effective treatments and discover cures for M&D. It's pretty simple, basically: improve care and find treatments. We awarded our first grant back in 1984, and we actually amalgamated with M&D Australia in 2010. And 2011 was our first year where we awarded over $1 million in research funding. And the last couple of years, we're now looking at $3 to $4 million a year we're awarding in funding, though. Unfortunately, perhaps next year will be a little bit less due to the current circumstances with COVID and following on from the bushfires. So it's not the best time to be fundraising in Australia.
we'll touch a little bit more, a lot more, I guess, on current research projects, where the funding over all these years has come from. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit more about you and your background. I know you've had 20 or so years in a very different field to MND. So, as I said, you're a very clever man. So how about you tell us all about you and where you've come from?
Oh, I'd never call myself a clever man. I'd say I know a lot about a very little area of a very small amount of things. But yeah, I did my PhD far too long ago for me to think about it too hard. But back in the UK, that's where I'm from originally, if you hadn't picked up the accent. And all my research career, I spent about 20 years at the bench, as we say, as in a lab doing experiments. And that was all in bone and joint disease. So basically, I worked in arthritis and osteoporosis, which are obviously very sort of prevalent diseases. But I think one way to phrase them, I think we discussed it earlier, would say they're less urgent diseases. There's not that 2 to 3 year window where you really need something to happen. I've worked around the world. I've worked in the US and Canada, and within Australia, I've worked in Sydney and Brisbane, in medical research institutes, universities, and I've also worked in a biotech company where we were trying to develop drugs. And as I said, after 20 years, I've now moved into research management roles. So I've had senior roles at universities. So the big advantage there, I think, it gives me a real broad experience of research. So I know what it's like to be a researcher. I know what it's like to be the university side of it, where we actually manage the research. And now I guess I'm a research funder. So I've got that real, I guess, 360-degree vision of research and that broad experience to work out good strategies and see how we can best spend our money. We've got the smart guys out there, the guys that do the research. I don't need to know MND in and out. I don't confess to that. I'm on a very steep learning curve. I'm learning lots about MND, but we've got the uber smart people out there who are in the labs and in the clinics and out there in helping patients who really do know. And I just have to try and make sure that knowledge and that ability is best utilised is really my role, and to make sure we fund it and support it as well as we can and we don't waste our money.
Yeah.
Which is really, I think, the most important thing. Don't waste our money.
Absolutely. And speaking of money, all things M&D is expensive. And, we've touched on over the last few weeks about the cost of, the care and support and equipment that we do provide here at M&D Victoria. But research is insanely expensive. And so many funds do need to go into research to ultimately one day find that cure and before that, treatments and whatnot. We at M&D Victoria do provide that care, but over 25 or so years have been funding research. And I know in recent times, we might get a call from someone and they do want to donate specifically to research, which can definitely be done. And Gethin's my man there at M&D Australia. He'll be the one I call to direct these people to who want to, find out a little bit more about what research projects are currently happening and what their funds may do. So how about you, Gethin, talk through how M&D Australia and M&D Research Australia has been funded over the years by all sorts of people, but including the state associations.
Yeah, so basically we're funded purely by donations, bequests, and through fundraising efforts from our partners. So we've got a number of partners we work directly with, such as MND and Me, who are based up in Brisbane, and the Monstar Foundation in Sydney. But we also work closely with the state associations. Basically, as you said, when someone calls up to you guys and says, look, I want to donate to research, you basically act almost as a collection agency, you could call it, for us. Because, it makes sense, really, that if all the states funnel their research funding into us, then we can centralise it. And that makes sure, one, we don't have duplication, which is really critical. And that gives us that greater critical mass of funding. So larger scale, longer term projects can be funded. Like we can fund a 3-year fellowship, that's $300,000. A lot of the time it would be very hard for a state association to raise those funds on a regular basis, but by pooling all the funds through the state associations, through other foundations, and we have donations that come direct to us as well, and we get quite a few bequests like that as well. And the state associations do a fantastic job of corralling the funding. They have a lot of, I mean, I know it's certainly for Victoria, you have a lot of local organisations as well that fundraise for you, and that comes through to us. I know you have the Benalla Walk to Defeat. We have a name grant for those guys every year, and we also the Rock Off MND, who fund the Jenny Simcoe Research Grant, and they've been going for a long time, and they're fantastic organisations that every year they run these fantastic events that just that support, you know, a research project every year, and that's just an amazing effort, you know, for especially a small town like a Benalla to actually raise significant funds every year. It's just amazing to see.
Yeah, and Benalla, you know, touch on them for a little bit. You know, I've been up there, you know, around the time of these big events, and their main street is lined with Act to Defeat MND banners, and it's quite a special place to be. And just to see such a small town doing big things for MND research, it's really brilliant.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting down there. Actually, I was going to go this year, obviously, but COVID's kind of put a bit of a stop on that. But next year, hopefully, when we get back to close to normality, I'm really looking forward to going to visit those guys.
It's not a bad place. Let's touch on a little bit about, you know, we all know down here in Victoria in particular, Fight MND and all the great work they've done in the last few years towards MND research, and, you know, quite a very powerful body and are doing, as I said, groundbreaking stuff. How about you talk through the difference between MND Australia and Fight MND, and what MND Australia do, or research, MND Research Australia do in particular, and differentiate there?
Yeah, well, like you said, Fight MND have done a fantastic job of both raising awareness in probably in people that really would have no idea about MND. They've done a great job also. Greg Hunt is obviously, they've got a great relationship with him, so that helps. That's great to put that on the radar as well. But we are different. Like I said, we don't actively fundraise ourselves. We rely either on our basically people around the country to either donate or fundraise for us, and we tend to fund different types of grants to Fight MND. They look for the bigger grants. They're really driving towards the cure. We probably fund a little bit more of the early stage research, the real testing of ideas, a lot of probably more lab than clinical work. But we do also look to fund care research, which is an area where Fight MND are less interested. So one of the examples is, say, David Berlowitz down in Melbourne with his NIV study, the non-invasive ventilation, and seeing how he can actually bring that into the home a lot more, so patients can get basically do their sleep studies at home, and they can actually implement the NIV at home without the patients having to come and spend time in a clinical facility. A number of other studies. There's a study we funded again in Victoria, actually, Susan Mathers, to look at health literacy amongst carers and patients, you know, to make sure they're making the best decisions they can about their quality of care, and they understand what their choices are. So studies like that, they're probably less likely to be funded by Fight MND, but we're happy to fund those. On a different aspect, advocacy is another core aspect of what we do. We try and meet with politicians when hopefully soon new drugs do become available. We'll be working with the state associations and hopefully the governments to make sure that these drugs get through into the approved by the TGA, and, you know, eventually hopefully get covered by the PBS as soon as possible. And that's a core role as a national body we get to play as well. And FightMD have done a fantastic job of awareness, but we're also looking to raise awareness as well. And we also represent the patient body as well. We want to try and make sure that we have the patient voice involved in research as much as possible. And that's something we're actually working with FightMD at the moment to drive that voice and to drive the listening to that voice.
Yeah, probably a really good segue into where M&D Australia fit into the ALS M&D International Alliance. We've spoken about where you fit in the scheme of the national network, but obviously the worldwide network is far bigger. And how about we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Australia actually has a very prominent position in M&D research across the world. We have some amazing researchers, and certainly, if you guess, we use a cliche, we bat well above our weight. Our researchers are held in very high esteem, and we've obviously already developed some of the treatments that are such as copper ATSM that are coming out of Australia. And the amount of funding we raise is really significant when we compare it to other countries. We raise significantly more funds than, say, Canada do for research, including us and FightMD, that is. So there is the International M&D ALS Alliance, and we are the Australian representatives within that alliance. And that allows us both on the care and the research side to basically really share ideas and be able to meet with the regular meetings with our counterparts in the other countries, US, Canada, UK, and Europe, as well as South America. And also it allows us to it enables us to build much stronger links with our local partners as well. So there's PACTALS, which is the Pan-Asia ALS Society, and we're building strong links through the alliance with those guys. In fact, we're supposed to be in September at a meeting in Japan, but obviously that's not going to happen. But that will happen next year, and that's going to be the real advantage there is that we can take our best practice, some of our research ideas, and share those with countries that perhaps don't have the research infrastructure or sometimes the clinical resources to really be able to develop this themselves. The alliance allows all these countries to come together. I also get to talk regularly with my counterparts in the research arms of the other organisations, and we can share ideas, see understand research breakthroughs coming on, discuss the clinical trials, which is really important, what's going to come through, what's the data like. Everyone has their own contacts, so sometimes you can get some information that perhaps you wouldn't be able to, that's not publicly available, and get a heads up on perhaps some potential crises, such as there was a shortage on Rizol a couple of months ago, but we understood it wasn't a worldwide shortage, so that certainly lessened the urgency of that. And connections like that are really, really useful.
Yeah, brilliant. And I know personally, I had the privilege of attending the international conference in Perth late last year, and just to be surrounded by all these incredible people all around the world just really highlights that we are really one network, all working together for the same reason. One of the most common questions that you'll get asked, I know, and I get asked, and all those that work in the M&D space do, where is research at? What are some current research projects that are happening in Victoria or Australia or even around the world that you want to potentially highlight? And just talk about where they're at and what's happening in the world of research. Yeah,
so trying to sort of blow our own trumpet a little bit. There's a couple of drug trials that are moving into phase 3 at the moment. So there's a copper ATSM that's happening in Australia right now, and some of the first patients have just finished that trial. So we'll be waiting for the rest of the patients to come through and to see hopefully some positive results from that. There's a Lighthouse trial that was testing the antiretroviral drugs as well through the country. That showed some very positive results from the phase 2, and the phase 3 study on that is just about to start. So that was managed by Julian Gold out of Sydney, And so that's two very exciting clinical trials that have really spun out of Australia. I mentioned the non-invasive ventilation studies that David Berlowitz is doing. We have funded him on a smaller scale, but he's just managed to win $3.5 million from the Medical Research Future Fund to take that to a much larger scale, to a national scale. And that's, at the moment, non-invasive ventilation is the most effective intervention in MND at the moment. It's better than riluzole. It prolongs life, as you probably know way better than me. So, if we can take this at a much wider scale and improve implementation of that, that's a fantastic outcome. At the sort of more basic science level, Brad Turner at the Florey, he's funded to test a therapy looking at the disrupted molecular mechanisms at the cell level in MND. And he's got a combination of mouse models, and he also looks in cells that are directly derived from patients to see if those drugs he's testing are going to work. There's many other researchers across the country, but some really exciting clinical trials going on at the moment around the world. Probably the most exciting one at the moment is the testing of the genetics, basically the gene therapies. So as most people are probably aware, about 10% of MND patients have a genetic cause underlying their disease. And the huge problem in MND treatment is that we actually know what causes MND in most patients. It can be a combination of different factors. We really don't know the underlying causes. But in the genetic cases, though we don't know that maybe perhaps the exact mechanism or what that gene is exactly doing, we do know it has a fundamental effect in that disease, in those cases. So there's 3 treatments being tested and developed around the world at the moment for the 3 most common genes, SOD1, C9orf72, and FUS. And SOD1, the gene for SOD1, tofersen, is currently in phase 3 trials. Some of them are happening in Australia. And the data from the phase 2 trials look really, really promising. And if any of the treatments is going to work, that is the one I think has the best chance at the moment, because we know that it has a fundamental effect on the disease, which is a lot different to many of the other treatments that we're not quite sure exactly what their role in the disease is. So fingers crossed, obviously, but hopefully we'll get some results soon from that trial. And that could be potentially the first time we can really prove that MND is not an intractable disease. And then the sort of flow-on benefit from that would be that I think once we demonstrate that, other drug companies are going to have another look at MND and perhaps start coming in and funding research into MND and funding new treatments as well. Because that's what we don't have at the moment are some of the really, really big pharmaceutical companies, your Mercks and your sort of Amgens, etc. They start thinking that actually this is a disease that we can treat, then they will hopefully come in, and that will be a huge injection of resources and funds into MND research.
Absolutely. There's so much happening at the moment, and it's definitely really exciting.
Yeah. There's something like well over 50 trials at the moment happening. I think it's closer to 70 in clinical trials happening around the world. That's an amazing number, I think.
Incredible. Scientists, researchers into all diseases, but MND in this case, need money. They need grants. We touched on a little bit earlier about a few named grants. People down here in Victoria have talked me through a little bit about the named grant process. I know for me it's quite an exciting opportunity because if you're going to run a big fundraising event, or you're very generous and have a lot of money to donate towards research, being able to do that in the name of a loved one that may have gone through MND is really exciting. Talk us through the named grant process.
Yeah, so we're incredibly flexible about this, actually. If a donor comes to us and says, I've got a set amount of money, we don't have a set amount, it's more of a discussion. We're happy to go, okay, what sort of grant would you like to fund? We have the options of we have 1 year innovator grants, we call them, and they're like funding one project for 1 year, usually to the tune of $100,000. We're happy to work with donors to top that amount up. Obviously, not many people have $100,000 to donate, but a lot of people have been very generous around that. And those grants then will fund, as I said, a very specific project, one researcher or one group of researchers to really test one idea for a year. For larger grants, we have fellowships, and that will fund a young up-and-coming researcher for 3 years. It will fund their salary, basically, so they can get into their research and really get their teeth into a project. And it's a really difficult stage of being a researcher, where you're trying to establish yourself. It's a very competitive field out there. So by having that little bit of security for 2 or 3 years, you can get on, really focus on your research. You're not madly worrying about where your salary is going to come from, and then really push a project and an idea forward. 3 years, you can make a huge change. It also lets you perhaps work in a lab then of a larger researcher, and they don't have to worry about finding money for your salary either. So again, it just gives you a bit of security, and it also builds up the M&D research capacity and capabilities in the country, which is really critical. So we've got enough researchers to do the research we need to do. Then we have other things that we have recently, where the last 5 years we funded the Betty Laidlaw Research Prize. This is a fantastic donation from John and Betty Laidlaw, who unfortunately have recently passed away. And we will be having another John and Betty Laidlaw Research Prize this year. And that's when you get people coming in with some very significant sums of money. And then we actually had to make up a whole new research sort of grant to fit the model they wanted to fund. So we're happy to talk to people. They come to us and say, look, I'd really like to fund this type of research, and we can go, yes. And saying that, then they can place certain restrictions on it. Like some of our grants have to be in a certain field, such as care research or genetics research. And some funders would like to see the research being done in, say, the home state, Victoria, or Sydney, Queensland. And we fund research right across the country. In any institution, we don't really care where you are, as long as what you're doing is top quality. Yeah. So we're happy again to work with potential donors to create a funding model that they're really happy for their loved one's name to be attached to.
Yeah, what a legacy to leave, really.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you could be the person that really drove that cure. I mean, it's a long bow to draw, but it has to start somewhere, and you could say yes. My mother's memory. Made the difference.
Yep. I've got one question here. I will ask it word for word. It probably comes down to a little bit about potential clinical trials, but my mum is suffering from MND. Does MND Australia contact sufferers to get what could be vital personal information that could help find why the disease happens? Many sufferers, it seem to be diagnosed after an injury or fall, having been well before this. Is it worth looking into to ask questions and get research data from new sufferers?
Certainly. There is the MND registry that's run by Paul Talman, based out of Geelong. And that is looking to recruit, basically, if possible, every patient in Australia into their database and collect that exact data and more, how these patients respond to treatment, what their history is. They're also linked into the SALSA genetic study as well. So we're also hoping to capture genetic data for all these patients as well. And obviously you need controls to compare them to. And so we're looking for hopefully carers, family members, household members as well, who can provide that additional data. So that is a model that's being sort of replicated around the world, and it's incredibly important to collate this data. Whether it's the correlation with falls or trauma, obviously that's something that has been looked at. It's the jury is out on it. There's certainly a lot of data where a lot of sports people seem to get the disease, but at the moment it's hard to tell whether is it because we hear more about famous sports people when they do get the disease, rather than is it an actual real correlation again. There have been some interesting studies that have suggested there's certainly a correlation with head trauma. But again, they're early days, and these studies need to be verified. I'm afraid at the moment we still, apart from the genetic causes, we're still are unsure of how you get MND.
Yeah, and that's one thing about the disease. Data is so critical because it doesn't affect all that many people, 2,100 people roughly at any one time in Australia. And that's where data is key. One more thing, I guess. Where do you see the future of M&D research going in the short term and potentially the long term?
Look, short term it's all about the current trials happening at the moment. You know, there's a lot going on. There's quite a few of them are moving into the phase 3, which is a real critical make or break stage. And the great thing about it is they're all attacking or addressing different aspects of the disease. You know, we're not all putting our eggs in one basket. You know, there's stem cell studies going on. There are drugs addressing immune neuroinflammation. There's drugs addressing the muscle wastage and nutritional challenges in MND. So all these different approaches are complementary to each other, and you've got to think that, you know, we're going to get some efficacy in some of these treatments. Longer term, I think the key is there's never going to be a single blockbuster drug. You know, it's not going to be, here's your pill and it's going to fix things. It's going to be a combination. So the future is going to be sort of a personalized medicine approach, I think. That may involve some genetics as well, but it may also go, okay, let's look at all your symptoms. Everyone's different. It's a very heterogeneous disease. So hopefully we'll have like a cocktail or a battery of drugs you can go into and go, okay, you need this, this, and this. And that's really going to help slow the disease down and address those specific symptoms for each person. I mean, it'd be great to think we do have a single drug in absolute in the future. That would be a fantastic, and perhaps in the far future that would be the case. But certainly in the near future and the not so near future, I think it will be the personalised medicine approach with a collection of different treatments that will aid our patients the best.
Yep, perfect. Good answer. And look, I think that's probably a really good place to leave it. I want to thank you. Research is a topic that we can talk for hours. And I know you did say the other day that, you know, if you do go on a bit long, I'll stop you, but I certainly didn't have to do that. I think you've done very well to condense this topic into half an hour. But look, I think it'd be very well worth having another conversation in a few months' time about research, because there's so many topics within the topic. So thank you so much for your time tonight, Gethin. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to just drop them in the comments box, and we can either answer or pass them on to Gethin down the track. But look, as I said earlier at the start, we are going to take a little 4-week break. I'm going to take a little 4-week break. I'll be back resuming with Dan in August, and I guess it's an opportunity if anyone has any topics or they want to hear covered, please get in touch with me. Again, you can just use the comment section or email me. Or if there's any particular guests you want to hear from or dob in to potentially come on and share their story or share their expertise, I'd certainly love to hear from anyone. So on that note, again, thank you, Gethin, for your expertise and knowledge on the research topic, and thank you for all the great work you do there at M&D Australia.
Thanks, Dan, for having me on, and glad to come on again in a few months, as you said.
Sounds like a plan. Good night.
Good night.